It started with the rain. Not the dramatic kind you see in movies, not thunder or a storm, just a quiet, steady drizzle, the kind that soaks into your clothes without you noticing until you feel cold and small. I stood at the bottom of the courthouse steps, watching my family disappear inside, one by one, as if I didn't exist. Not one glance back. Not even from David. He used to hold my hand when we were kids, and Mom would get upset. Back when we thought blood meant something. The security guard stepped in front of me, eyes flicking down to his clipboard. "Sorry, ma'am. Private room. Family only." I didn't answer right away. I just stared at the doors, heavy oak, cold brass handles, the kind that make a statement. I could see them through the glass. My brother, my sister-in-law, Mom's lawyer, all dry and laughing. A bubble I wasn't allowed to touch. My hand lifted reflexively, like maybe if I reached for the handle, the memory of me would rush back to them. "They said you're not on the list," the guard added, softer this time. I looked him in the eye. He wasn't trying to be cruel, just doing his job. Still, it made my stomach knot. That I had to explain who I was in a building where my own mother's will was being read. "I'm Michelle Hart," I said. "I am immediate family." The guard hesitated. That was enough time for the next car to pull up behind me. A black town car, clean, quiet. I didn't have to look. I already knew who was in it. I felt the presence before I saw him. Mitchell Raines stepped out like he owned the steps. Not arrogant, just controlled. The kind of man who wears a courtroom like a second skin. He didn't speak to me. Didn't need to. We had already talked. We had already planned. He flashed his badge, handed the guard the court order, and said in the smoothest voice I've ever heard, "We're expected." We walked in together side by side. The guard stepped away without another word. Inside, it was warm and silent, but not the good kind. The kind that feels like judgment. Every eye turned to us. My sister-in-law whispered something behind her palm. My brother froze mid-sentence. And Mr. Tilson, my mother's longtime attorney, cleared his throat 3 times before speaking. "Michelle," he began. "This isn't necessary?" I finished for him. "I agree. It never should have been." I sat down in the seat across from Mom's empty chair. I chose that one on purpose. She used to sit at the head of the table during Sunday dinners, flanked by David and me. I used to think that meant something, the way she looked over us. But toward the end, she barely looked at me at all. I didn't take off my coat. I didn't put down my purse. I just folded my hands and waited. "Shall we begin?" Mitchell said coolly. David leaned forward. "Mom changed the will." I nodded. "I know. She didn't want to fight," he added quickly. "She wanted peace." That almost made me laugh. Peace? My mother didn't know peace. She knew control. She knew silence. She knew how to punish without ever raising her voice. She also wanted honesty, I said. Didn't she? I let the silence do the talking. Let them feel the weight of all the words I hadn't said over the years, all the holidays I'd shown up to, smiling, swallowing every bite of bitterness they served, all the phone calls that ended with, "Michelle, just let it go," when I tried to speak up. I let them sit with that. Tilson shuffled papers. "Let's proceed." He read it aloud. My mother's final wishes, dictated 3 months after our last fight. The one where I finally stood up and said what no one else had the spine to. That she was playing favorites. That she had manipulated us for years. That she turned David into a mirror of her disappointment. And here it was, in ink. I was out. Not reduced. Not minimized. Removed. Like I never existed. I didn't flinch. I expected it. They thought that would break me. Mitchell stood up and opened his own folder. "We have documents to enter into the record," he said. David scoffed. "What documents?" "Communications between Mrs. Hart and her financial advisor. Handwritten notes, audio recordings, evidence of coercion." That got their attention. "What are you trying to do?" My sister-in-law hissed. "Are you accusing your own mother?" I raised one hand, not to silence her, but to keep myself steady. I'm not accusing anyone, I said quietly. I'm just showing what's already there. They tried to argue. Tilson stammered something about timing, about protocol. David's face flushed red. My sister-in-law reached for her phone, but none of them moved to touch the folder Mitchell laid out in front of them. They were too afraid. I stayed seated, still as a painting. I wanted them to look at me. Really look, because this was what they'd made. You all thought I wouldn't come, I said. You thought I'd cry or beg or walk away like I always have. But I didn't come for the money. I came because I finally understand something. I looked directly at David. I understand that silence protects power. And I've been silent for too long. I let the words hang in the air, let them feel it. Not just what I said, but what it meant. This wasn't revenge. This was reclamation. And as the tension thickened, as everyone scrambled to catch up to the moment that was already slipping out of their control, I stood up slowly and walked toward the head of the table. I placed my hand on the back of the chair, the same chair Mom always sat in. This isn't where it started, I said softly. But this is where it changes. Before the will, before the courtroom, before the silence, I thought I understood what family meant. I wasn't always this composed. I wasn't born with armor. It took years to build it. Years of soft expectations and quieter betrayals. But if you had seen me 5 years ago, you would have called me hopeful, maybe even proud. I was the responsible one. That's how they labeled me. Not the favorite, not the golden child, just the one who always picked up the pieces, the one who showed up. When Mom needed rides to her doctor appointments, I was there. When David forgot her birthday 2 years in a row, I was the one organizing the surprise dinner and pretending he had something planned all along. It didn't bother me. Not at first. I had a life, a job I loved, nonprofit development, helping underserved kids get access to education. It didn't pay much, but it mattered to me. I had my apartment, my books, my plants. I wasn't flashy. I wasn't married. I wasn't the one bringing wine to Thanksgiving with a story about my latest real estate deal like David. But I was grounded, solid. My relationship with Mom? It was complicated. She didn't believe in talking things out. Her love came in sideways gestures, a folded towel on the edge of your bed, a slice of cake wrapped in foil after dinner. But she had a way of shrinking you without raising her voice. I could never do enough. If I called her every day, it was too much. If I skipped a weekend visit, it was, I guess you're busy now. Still, I thought I knew where I stood. I thought loyalty counted for something. David was always the star, even when he failed. When his first business tanked, Mom said he was taking risks. When he cheated on his first wife, Mom said, "Marriage is hard." Meanwhile, when I told her I didn't want kids, she sighed like I had failed an invisible exam. But I swallowed it. All of it. Because I believed, I truly believed, that love would eventually balance the scales. That if I just stayed kind, stayed present, it would all even out. That maybe I didn't shine as brightly, but I held the foundation together. There was this one moment, a small thing, but I think about it a lot. We were at Mom's house for Easter. She'd made her famous ham and lemon cake. David was talking about some property he was flipping in Boca, and I was just refilling everyone's drinks, making sure the oven was off, checking the dog's water bowl. Mom leaned over to David, touched his arm, and said, "You've always made me proud." He smiled like it was nothing, like it was normal. And it was. Then she looked at me, and I waited. For anything. A compliment, a thank you, a glance. She said, "Michelle, did you check if the ice cream's soft enough?" That was it. And I told myself, like I always did, it's fine. It doesn't mean anything. Don't make a scene. But something inside me shifted that day. I started noticing more. How I always got the couch while David got the guest room. How my ideas were sweet while his were smart. How when I mentioned wanting to take a sabbatical, Mom asked if I was okay. But when David said he was between things, she offered him money. It wasn't just favoritism, it was erasure. And still, I stayed. Because I believed something very specific, something I carried like scripture. If you're good and kind and loyal, you'll be valued. Maybe not loudly, but deeply. I thought that was how family worked. I thought sacrifice would eventually be seen. Looking back, I see how naive that was. But back then, it was gospel. When Mom got sick, just fatigue at first, then the diagnosis, I didn't hesitate. I adjusted my hours, took her to appointments, learned how to refill her pill trays. She didn't ask, she didn't have to. I was the one who read through the medical forms, who found a specialist, who sat with her during chemo when David said the smell of the hospital made him nauseous. She never said thank you, but she let me brush her hair when it started falling out. And I thought that meant something. David showed up when the doctors talked money, when the questions started circling about insurance, power of attorney, long-term care. He was suddenly present again. Charming, smiling, asking the right questions, offering to help with paperwork. I should have seen the warning signs, how Mr. Tilson started showing up more often, how Mom's expressions turned tighter when I walked into the room, how David always left the door cracked when he talked to her, like he wanted me to hear just enough. One night, I overheard them laughing. I was coming down the hallway with her tea, and I heard my name. "She's always been so serious," Mom said. David chuckled. "She means well." "I know," Mom sighed, "but she just takes everything so personally." The teacup rattled in my hand. I didn't say anything. I didn't walk in. I just stood there, letting the warmth of the cup burn into my palm until it cooled. Until I felt nothing. That was the beginning of the end. I think part of me started detaching that night. I didn't know it consciously, but my soul started backing away, watching everything from the outside, like a test I already knew I was failing. Even then, I kept showing up. I helped her finalize her care plan, drove her to meet with Mr. Tilson. I sat in the waiting room while they talked. And when she came out and said, "I think it's time we updated some things," I smiled and said, "Whatever you need." That was 6 weeks before she passed. And when I got the call that she'd gone peacefully in her sleep, I cried like a child, not just for her, but for everything I had carried. Everything I never said. Everything I had hoped for that would now never come. It wasn't until 3 days later that David told me the will had been changed, that Mom had wanted to make sure things were simple, that she wanted someone with more business experience to manage the estate. I remember blinking, just blinking, as if he had spoken in another language, as if my body hadn't registered the betrayal yet. And that night, alone in my apartment, I sat on the floor, phone beside me, untouched. I didn't call anyone, didn't rage, didn't scream. I just sat there and realized she saw me the whole time, and she still chose him. That's when the kindness cracked. Not the surface kindness, but the deep belief that had kept me in line, the myth I had built my identity around, that goodness earns protection. It doesn't. Not in families like mine. Not when silence is currency and loyalty is disposable. That night, I opened a new journal, and I wrote one sentence. They don't expect me to fight. Then I closed the book, wiped my face, and started planning. I found out through a text. Not a phone call, not a meeting, not even a letter. Just a text from David, sent at 9:42 p.m. on a Thursday. I was sitting in bed, in pajamas, half watching some documentary I wasn't really absorbing, when the notification blinked across my screen. Just a heads up. Mom made some changes to the will. She didn't want any drama. It's all been handled. No greeting, no warmth. Just that, like he was telling me the trash pickup schedule changed. I reread it twice, then once more, slower. Some changes. Handled. The language was surgical, sanitized, designed to sound benign. But my stomach twisted into something hard and cold. I called him. Straight to voicemail. I called again. No answer. The third time, he picked up. Michelle, now's not a good time. You're going to explain that text, I said, voice flat. I didn't want to stress you out, he said. There's been enough tension lately. Tension? I laughed. It came out cracked. David, what did she change? She left the house to me. It's just easier that way. You're not exactly here. I was there every week. I took her to chemo. I handled everything. She said you were getting too emotional, that you couldn't make clear decisions. I went silent. That was the line. That was the script she always ran when I stopped being obedient. Too emotional. Not practical. Not level-headed. Like my humanity disqualified me. Don't make this a thing, Michelle. It's done. She wanted it this way. I sat there staring at the wall after he hung up. My body was cold, but my face burned. It wasn't about the house. It wasn't about the will. It was about what it meant. That all those years of showing up, of sacrificing quietly, were disposable. I stayed up that night until sunrise. I didn't cry. I didn't sleep. I just sat in the dark, listening to the radiator hum, trying to understand how someone could look at my loyalty and see a threat. The funeral was 2 days later. I hadn't planned to speak, but something inside me needed to stand up. I wore navy instead of black. I sat 3 rows back. David gave the eulogy, all warm anecdotes and curated grief. When he finished, I stood up. People turned. A few whispered. I didn't care. I wasn't going to say anything, I began. But silence is what got us here. David shot me a look like I had pulled a gun. I ignored it. I loved my mother deeply, and I spent a long time believing that love was a transaction, that if I did enough, if I was good enough, I'd earn my place in her heart. But some people don't trade in love. They trade in control. There were gasps. I saw Mr. Tilson's face twist. David started to rise, but I kept going. She didn't owe me anything. But I wish just once she had looked at me and seen the daughter who stayed, not the one who spoke too loudly. I sat down. Not one person clapped. The silence was heavier than applause could ever be. After the service, no one approached me. Not the neighbors I grew up with. Not the cousins I once babysat. Not even our Aunt Elaine, who used to sneak me cookies at Christmas. They all walked past me like I was made of smoke. David cornered me near the parking lot. What the hell was that? You told the truth, I said. Now, I told mine. She's not even in the ground yet, and you're making it about yourself. Everything was always about you, David. I'm just done pretending otherwise. He leaned in, voice cold. You think this is going to get you anything? I looked him in the eye and whispered, No. But it's going to take something from you. That's when I knew. Revenge wasn't about getting even. It was about balance. About reclaiming weight that had been stolen. But before I could act, the real betrayal came. 3 days later, I got a call from Mr. Tilson. He said he just wanted to confirm that I'd received the paperwork detailing the estate breakdown. I said no. He sounded confused. I sent it to the address on file, the one David gave me. I paused. What address? He read it aloud. It was David's address. He had changed it. Without my consent, my legal information forwarded to him. I hung up without another word. My hands were shaking. My mind was sprinting. This wasn't just emotional now. It was calculated. I called Mitchell Raines that night, a friend of a friend. Quiet reputation, surgical with truth. By the time we spoke, I had the folder ready. Printed emails, call logs, notes from Mom's medical visits, voice recordings she left me. The ones where she sounded lucid, where she apologized, where she said, I don't know why David's always in the middle of things. You're the one I trust. I had proof, but I didn't feel powerful. I felt hollow, because underneath all the fury, all the strategy, there was still a part of me, small, aching, that loved them, that loved her. Even now. even as she betrayed me with her final act, even as David erased me like I was a clerical error. I remembered the Christmas when we were kids. David and I had spent the whole day building a snow fort in the backyard. He wanted to be king of the fort. I let him. I didn't care. I just wanted to play. Mom brought out cocoa. 2 mugs. One had marshmallows, the other didn't. David got the one with marshmallows. When I asked why, she said, "He asked first." I didn't remember that until much later. Until I realized I'd spent my life accepting less, waiting to be given what I'd already earned. That was the night I vanished. I turned off my phone. I left work without notice. I got in my car and drove south. No destination. No plan. I just needed to leave the echo chamber of their voices, of my own disappointment. I booked a room in a quiet motel near a lake I'd never seen before. I stared at the ceiling for hours. I didn't write. I didn't eat. I didn't answer the door when the cleaning staff knocked. I wasn't Michelle Hart anymore. I was just empty space. It's hard to describe what it feels like to disappear while still being alive. Your body moves, you brush your teeth, you breathe, but nothing connects. You become a hallway with no doors. A story with the last page ripped out. And yet, in that silence, something began to whisper back. Not loud, not angry, just steady. A question. What if you stopped waiting to be chosen? I didn't leave a note. Didn't pack much, just drove. I passed cities I used to know, names that once meant something. I kept driving until the roads got quieter, the signs more faded. I stopped somewhere near the Blue Ridge foothills, in a town so small it barely made the map. There was a gas station, a diner, and a roadside motel that smelled like mildew and pine cleaner. Room 6. That became my world. The wallpaper peeled at the edges. The TV didn't work, the shower never got hot, but none of that mattered. Not when the ache inside me made everything else feel irrelevant. I checked in under the name Marla. It was the first thing that came to mind. The woman at the desk didn't ask for ID. I handed her cash, and she handed me a key. I stopped wearing makeup, stopped checking my phone, stopped eating on schedule. There was a diner down the road, and I'd walk there sometimes, order coffee and toast, just to hear another human voice. No one asked questions. They just refilled my cup. Days blurred. Time didn't exist the same way anymore. It just passed, like wind. I lost track of how long I'd been there. A week? 2? Every morning I woke to silence. Every night I listened to the hum of the vending machine outside my room and wondered how a heart could still beat when it had nothing left to believe in. I stopped looking in mirrors. Not because I hated what I saw, but because I didn't recognize it. My eyes had gone dull. My posture curled inward, like even my spine wanted to disappear. I looked like a woman in witness protection, only there was no crime. Unless you count being naive. I thought about Mom. Not the cold version. The real one. The one who made peach pie every July even when she was tired. The one who sang to herself when she folded laundry. I hated her, and missed her in the same breath. And David? I don't even know what I felt. He was everywhere and nowhere. His voice lived in the cracks of my skull. You're being dramatic. It's just easier this way. Don't make it about you. Every time I thought about going back, I couldn't breathe. What would I go back to? The life I built was burned down. The people I thought I knew were masks. And the woman I had been, the fixer, the helper, the one who never asked for more, she was gone. There was one night I thought I wouldn't make it. It was raining hard, louder than usual, thunder in the distance. I sat on the floor, back against the bed frame, knees to my chest, the motel room swimming in gray light. I hadn't eaten in 2 days. My lips were cracked. My hands were cold. I held the hotel pen in one hand and a napkin in the other. I wrote, "Maybe some people just don't come back." That was it. Not a goodbye note, not a plan. Just that sentence, shaky and wet from the sweat in my palm. I stared at it for a long time. I folded it into quarters. I slid it under the lamp. Then I curled up on the mattress, fully clothed, shoes still on. I stared at the ceiling and waited for the kind of sleep that doesn't come, but morning did. And with it, a knock. Not loud, just 3 soft taps. I froze. No one knocked here. The motel was nearly empty. I walked to the door, heart thudding. I didn't speak. I waited. Then came a voice. Soft, southern, maybe mid-40s. Sorry to bother. Your car window's down. Rain starting again. Silence. Then footsteps fading. I stood there, not moving, hand on the doorknob. It was so small, so stupid. But it cracked something. Someone had noticed I existed. Someone had seen me even for a second. Not for what I lost. Not for who I wasn't. Just me. The stranger in room 6 with the leaking soul. I walked outside. The air smelled like damp earth. The man was already gone, but he'd left a napkin under my wiper blade, folded carefully. On it, in blue ink. Storm tonight. Stay warm. I laughed. It wasn't joyful. It wasn't loud. It sounded like a breath I forgot I was holding. But it was the first time I'd felt anything real in weeks. I sat in the car for an hour, not driving, just breathing, listening to the storm roll in. That night I showered. Hot water finally worked. Maybe the pipes aligned. Maybe the universe threw me a bone. I let the steam cover the mirror. I didn't wipe it clean. I stood there dripping and whispered, "I'm still here." That was all. Not a promise, not a vow, but a statement. I'm still here. The next morning, I walked to the diner. Same waitress, same corner booth. I ordered eggs this time, not just toast. When she brought the plate, she smiled. "You're looking better," she said. I blinked. It was the kind of thing people say without thinking. But to me, it was a breadcrumb. Proof that maybe, just maybe, the path back wasn't gone. Just hidden. I didn't decide anything that day. I didn't make plans. But when I got back to the motel, I opened my bag. I took out the folder I had buried at the bottom. The one with Mom's voice recordings. The one with my notes, my research, my legal documents. I spread them out on the bed. I looked at every page, not for evidence, not for closure, but to remind myself, you were right. They made you feel crazy, but you weren't. You saw it clearly. You always did. By nightfall, I had repacked the folder. Tighter this time. Neat. Intentional. I placed it beside the lamp, right where the napkin used to be. The pen was still on the nightstand. I uncapped it and wrote 5 words across the top of a fresh page. If I return, I rise. And then I went to sleep. Not vanished. Just not yet ready. Coming back wasn't a decision. It was a momentum. Slow. Reluctant. Rooted not in forgiveness, but in clarity. I didn't drive straight home. I stayed off the highways, took back roads through towns where no one knew my name. I watched the world move without me and felt no urgency to catch up. But every day something small returned. The way I held my shoulders, the way I ordered coffee, the way I said my name at check-ins, like it had weight again. When I finally returned to the city, I didn't go back to my old apartment. I let the lease lapse. It was never mine anyway. It was just a holding cell dressed up like home. Instead, I rented a short-term sublet above a hardware store. Small, sparse, but clean. The kind of place where you hear your own breath when you wake up, and it doesn't scare you anymore. I got a job. Not the kind I used to have. Suits and donor meetings and spreadsheets filled with hollow smiles. This one was at a women's legal resource center, helping people file restraining orders, navigate court systems, reclaim stolen rights. I didn't tell them my full story. I didn't need to. They saw it in my eyes. There was a woman who came in during my second week. She was mid-30s, quiet, bruised, and terrified. Her boyfriend had locked her out, drained her joint account, told her no one would believe her. She clutched the paperwork with shaking hands. I walked her through it, step by step. I showed her how to file, how to document, how to leave no cracks. And when she looked at me, really looked, she whispered, "You make me feel like I can breathe again." That's when I knew. My pain wasn't wasted. It had a purpose now. I wasn't here to relive it. I was here to translate it into action, into clarity, into defense for people who hadn't yet found their voice. I wasn't healed, but I was useful. I started running again. At dawn. Empty streets, cold air, sneakers pounding pavement like war drums. Each step felt earned. Like I was reclaiming parts of my body that had gone numb. I didn't run to escape. I ran to arrive. And then one day, I got a call. A familiar voice. Low, hesitant. "Michelle, it's Anna Lane." I froze. "I know you probably don't want to hear from me," she said. "But I thought you should know. I saw David." My stomach tightened. "Okay. He's different, jumpy, nervous, talking to a lawyer every other week." "I'm sure he is." She paused. "I also found something." There was a rustle on the other end, paper shifting. "After the funeral, I cleaned out your mother's garage. I found a box labeled private. Thought it was just old letters. But there's a file in there. Legal correspondence. From before the will was changed." "What kind of correspondence?" "It's from Tilson's office, but it wasn't addressed to your mother. It was addressed to Camille." I blinked. Camille had been my mother's best friend. Church circle, widow. They used to bake together on Sundays. She had always been kind to me. I hadn't seen her since the memorial. She hugged me then, tight, teary-eyed, and said, "Your mother loved you, in her own way." I believed her. Until now. I met Elaine 2 days later at a neutral cafe. She slid the file across the table. Inside were copies of emails. One stood out immediately. From Camille J. to R. Tilson. lawchambers.com. Subject, regarding new documents. Per our discussion, Mrs. Hart believes Michelle may cause issues with the new estate arrangement. She's asked me to pass along her preferences discreetly. As you know, David agrees that limiting Michelle's access will avoid emotional turbulence. I'll continue supporting Mrs. Hart with any needed signatures. She trusts me to guide her. I read it 3 times. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just felt still, as if every blood cell had paused to absorb the depth of betrayal. Camille, the woman who braided my hair as a child, who read me bedtime stories when Mom was too tired, had orchestrated my exile like it was a favor. I looked at Elaine. Why would she do this? She shook her head, voice thick. Some people want to stay close to power, even if it means burning bridges they helped build. That night, I walked into the bathroom. I looked at myself for the first time in weeks. Really looked. I saw the fine lines, the new strength in my jaw, the quiet in my eyes. I wasn't broken. I was reforged, and I didn't want to hide anymore. I cut my hair, not drastically, just enough to feel the weight fall. I changed my wardrobe, black, gray, navy, clean lines, strong shoulders. I wasn't dressing to be pretty. I was dressing like armor. I called Mitchell Raines the next morning. "I'm ready." He didn't ask what I meant. We met that afternoon in his office. I laid out everything, the emails, the voice memos, the legal inconsistencies, the unauthorized change of address logs, the coercion hidden in care. Mitchell smiled, slow and deliberate. "Let's begin." And we did. We filed paperwork, opened a quiet investigation, not to reclaim money, but to expose manipulation, to invalidate the revised will based on undue influence and fraudulent representation. It wouldn't be fast. It wouldn't be easy. But it would be documented, filed, visible. I didn't plan to scream. I planned to reveal. While the case began moving through the early motions, I kept building myself. I volunteered for community workshops, taught women how to recognize legal gaslighting, helped write a grant proposal for safe housing. Every time I handed someone a clipboard, I handed them a little piece of myself, Not the wounded girl, but the woman who had walked through fire and mapped the way out. One afternoon, I stayed late at the center. A teenage girl was sitting outside, hoodie up, hands shaking. I brought her tea. No questions. She finally said, "Everyone acts like I'm crazy." I smiled gently. They do that when they're scared you might see things too clearly. She looked at me like I'd cracked some code. That night, walking home, I realized I used to need permission to be seen. Now I offer it to others. The folder on my desk grew thicker. The paper trail we were building was tight, clean, undeniable. Camille's involvement, David's pressure, Tilson's passive compliance. I wasn't just reclaiming my name, I was rewriting the part they tried to edit out. I changed my email signature that week. Michelle Hart, Legal Advocate Women's Defense Network. I stared at it for a long time before sending my first email. A symbolic gesture, maybe, but it mattered. Because this wasn't a return. This was a debut. They thought I was gone. I was just becoming impossible to ignore. They called it a clarification hearing. A sanitized phrase. Just paperwork, they said. A technical review. No drama necessary. But they knew. They all knew. The truth had been rustling under their feet for months, and now it was coming to the surface. The room was small. Too small for what was about to happen. Just 12 seats, oak table, cheap carpet, but there was something sacred about it. Not because of the law, but because I was no longer the one sitting in silence. Mr. Tilson was already there when I walked in, adjusting his cuffs, fidgeting with papers. He looked thinner, paler. He wouldn't meet my eyes. David arrived next, pressed shirt, nervous smile. Camille followed, dressed like it was Sunday service. Pearls, powder, and perfume, strong enough to mask the rot beneath. I didn't say a word to any of them. Mitchell sat beside me, calm, sharp, the kind of presence that says, "This isn't a fight, this is an unveiling." The clerk called us to order. The judge entered. Everyone stood. Then it began. Tilson started, reading his summary of the revised will, the one that removed me, elevated David, and echoed the voice of a woman who hadn't been of sound mind in her final months. I listened quietly, hands folded. I didn't blink. I didn't twitch. Because the more he spoke, the more it all sounded like a bad rehearsal of a lie everyone had agreed to, hoping no one would notice the cracks. When he finished, the judge turned to us. "Counselor?" Mitchell stood. "Your Honor, we respectfully submit a motion to invalidate the revised testament on the basis of undue influence and fraud. We have clear and corroborated evidence." The room shifted, breaths caught. He opened the folder. First, financials, deposits, transfers. A sudden spike in David's account after the revision. Second, call logs. Camille contacting Tilson's office on days my mother was undergoing treatment, directing changes on her behalf, without power of attorney. Third, audio. Mitchell pressed play. My mother's voice filled the room, tired, small, but lucid. "I don't remember signing anything. Camille said it was just a thank you letter." Another clip. "I don't want to cut Michelle out. She's the one who's been here." Gasps. One from the clerk. Camille went pale. David's mouth opened. No sound came out. Tilson dropped his pen, and I sat there, motionless, because nothing needed to be said. They had said it all. The judge leaned forward. "Is that Mrs. Hart's voice?" Tilson swallowed. "Yes, but no further explanation," Mitchell cut in. "We'll let the recordings speak for themselves." There was a silence that felt holy. Then the judge looked directly at David. "You claimed your mother was of sound mind when she altered the will?" David nodded weakly. "I thought she was." Camille said, "Camille isn't a medical professional, nor was she granted legal authority." He turned to Tilson. "And you approve these changes based on secondhand communication?" Tilson didn't answer. The judge sighed. "This is highly irregular. At best, negligent. At worst, he didn't finish. Instead, he turned to me. Ms. Hart, do you wish to address the court? I stood. I didn't bring notes. I didn't need them. I don't want the money, I said. This was never about that. I looked at David. This was about my name, my voice, my truth. You tried to erase it. I looked at Camille. You used my mother's fear as leverage, and then you wept at her funeral. I looked at Tilson last. And you were supposed to protect her. Instead, you protected power. Then I turned to the judge. My mother was not perfect, but she deserved better than this. And so did I. I sat down. The judge nodded slowly. Motion to invalidate the revised testament is under review. Effective immediately, all disbursements are frozen. An independent review will proceed. Possible legal action for misconduct is pending. Camille whispered something to David. David leaned back like he'd been punched. Tilson's hands shook as he gathered his papers. And me? I was still. Not because I was numb, but because I was whole. Afterward, in the hallway, David caught up to me. He didn't shout. He didn't argue. He just stood there, looking smaller. Why'd you do this? He asked. I tilted my head. Why'd you? He looked down. No answer. Camille approached next, her hands clasped like prayer. I only wanted what was best for your mother. You wanted to be in control, I replied. And you were, until you weren't. She blinked. I walked away. Tilson didn't come near me. He couldn't. I walked out of the courthouse into sunlight. Not symbolic, just real. But it felt earned. A reporter was waiting on the steps. Local press. Small column. She raised her mic. Ms. Hart, any comment? I smiled. Not with my lips, with my silence. Then I said softly, let the paperwork speak. She lowered the mic. People turned to watch me leave. Not because I raised my voice, but because I didn't have to. It's been 6 months. David hasn't called. Camille moved out of state. Tilson's license is under review, whatever that means in legal speak. Quiet accountability. No headlines. Just slow consequences. Exactly the way it should be. The estate is still in litigation, but I'm not waiting by the phone. I don't need an inheritance to feel rich anymore. I've already inherited something far more valuable, my own voice. Some days, I still catch myself rehearsing old wounds, the things I wish I'd said at the funeral, the moment I almost disappeared for good, but they don't weigh the same anymore. They pass through me, soft as wind. I'm back at the center full-time now. I'm not just helping anymore. I'm leading. We opened a second branch. I wrote the training manual. People call me Director Hart now. It feels surreal. Not because I wanted a title, but because I spent so long believing I had no place in the room. Last week, a young intern joined our staff. Soft-spoken, eyes like mine used to be. She hovered near the coffee machine on her first day, too afraid to ask how to open the cabinet. I showed her. She smiled and whispered, "Thank you." That's when I realized healing isn't loud. It's not some grand, dramatic reveal. It's found in tiny permissions, in giving someone else the thing you once begged the world to give you. I moved again, out of the sublet, into a little place with light, south-facing windows, a patch of grass outside where I'm learning to grow basil, badly. There's a quietness to my life now, but it's not emptiness. It's peace. Earned peace. There's a shoebox in my closet. Black leather, scuffed corners. It used to hold Mom's voice recordings, the documents, the paper trail that built my case. I kept it as a reminder, proof that I hadn't imagined it all. But last night, I took everything out, not to destroy it, to free it. I burned the copies in a steel fire pit behind the building, 1 page at a time, no rage, no tears, just gratitude. Each flame whispered back, "You carried this, and now you don't have to." Inside the box, I found something I'd forgotten, A photo. Me at 12, on the beach, holding Mom's hand. She wasn't smiling, but she wasn't cold either. We were both just there. Present. Two girls caught in the storm of womanhood, not yet knowing how far it would toss us. I kept the photo. Not to forgive, to remember, because for all her flaws, she shaped the fire in me. And maybe, in some way, I shaped hers. I've stopped needing apologies from people who don't know how to say them. I've stopped handing out explanations to people who only listen to reply. Some wounds don't need to be stitched closed. They need to be aired. Last Sunday, I spoke at a panel. Women in Law. A room full of stories like mine. Different shapes. Same ache. When I finished, a girl barely out of college approached me. She had a notebook pressed to her chest and a crack in her voice when she asked, "How do you know when it's over?" I smiled. "You don't," I said. "But one day, you stop bleeding when they say your name." She nodded, eyes wide, and scribbled it down like scripture. That evening, I walked home slowly. No rush. The air was crisp. A kid on a bicycle zipped past me on the sidewalk and yelled, "Excuse me, ma'am," with a grin too big for his face. He reminded me of David when we were small, before the shadows came between us. And maybe that's the lesson. Not that family can't fail you, but that love and betrayal can live in the same house, and only one of them gets to stay. When I reached my door, I found an envelope tucked under the mat. No return address. Just my name, handwritten. Inside was a check. Court-ordered restitution from the frozen assets. No note, no apology. I folded it in half and placed it inside a manila folder. Then I walked upstairs, logged into our center's donation portal, and transferred every cent to the Women's Legal Defense Fund. Let it do something better than sit in my account. Let it become the hammer in someone else's hand. I sat on my porch as the sun slipped down. No music, no wine, no one to impress. Just breath, just sky, just quiet. I used to think power looked like control. Now I know, real power is peace without permission. And sometimes the loudest justice is walking away without turning back.